Welcome to the Advanced Optic Introduction and Tutorial video. In this video I'll explain what the Advanced Optic asset is and how to use it. Advanced Optic has some features that I've not seen in any other marketplace asset on any engine or platform, including most AAA games. It features parallax, occlusion. It supports a fully configurable optic attachment system that will let you build up groups of optics to be attached to your weapons. And all of this is drop-in and requires minimal configuration. So if you want to use your own models and assets, that is also supported, and most existing assets should fit right in. So pretty much just by adding a couple of sockets, you can have optics on your in-game weapons straight away. I'll show you how to configure that now and how to get it running. The other assets you'll see used in this video are the Advanced Locomotion System, which I highly recommend, and the Stylized Desert Environment. These aren't included with the Advanced Optic, but I recommend you take a look at them as they are brilliant. There are two main files you'll always be messing around with in this. The first one is the Advanced Optic Manager, which you summon when you first spawn your weapon. And of course there's Optic Presets, which you can find some examples of in the Optic Presets folder. Our Optic preset files, which are all descended from the class Optic, they're exactly like what appear inside the Advanced Optic Manager, but they're persistent. You can create them to your heart's content and assign them anywhere. This is where I would set up pre-configured attachments that the user can find and attach to their weapons. You can configure everything here, treating it like defaults. You've got your attach index, you've got your rail position, scope distance from eye, depth of field aperture, which affects how blurry the background gets when you're aiming down the camera, minimum, maximum, and magnification step, which is of course useful for zooming in and out, focal plane, which of course affects reticle scaling when you zoom in. You want to be in first focal plane to have reticle scaling, which I recommend, and second focal planing if you don't want to have reticle scaling. Of course, this will affect parallax as well. We have light mode, visible, IR reflectance, and IR emissive. So visible is, as you'd expect, glass. IR reflectance is your traditional night vision goggles appearance, and IR emissive is your thermal camera with false color and all of that. You can assign lists of reticles. Currently this list is fixed. I will be doing a video later on how to extend this list and add more, and I recommend that people do check it out, but we include quite a few different styles of reticles with the project, and of course you can have more than one reticle. So in this case we start off with a marker ring, and then a marker, and then just the ring, which is very similar to some real scopes. You can assign reticle colors, and you can also set in your reticle what parts are colored, and I'll show you that in a bit too. Finally, you can set your scope and mount. Now, by default, you can just put a scope in and it will appear. You don't need a mount. So for instance, if your scope and your mount are one merged body like a reflex sight, you won't see a separate mount unless you want it. So here's our reflex sight, for instance. As you can see, it's an all-in-one unit. But you can additionally add a mount, and in the case of the reflex sight, quite often I find myself putting it on a canted sight. And that's as easy as just assigning the mesh for the canted sight or whatever mount you intend to use and running the game. There is one very important value in here that is easily overlooked, and that is the lens material index. This is the lens that will either be turned into a pass-through translucent layer or have a render target applied to it. So it's very important that it's set right or nothing will look right. So to find that, you open your model and you look at your texture slots. In this case, I know that this slot here is the glass that the viewer will be looking through. So that is index 1. So we're going to have to go back and change that. Of course, Unreal starts counting at 0. So let's go do that now. Lens material index 1. Fixed. In order to use that in our default, To make setup nice and easy, you come back into the Advanced Optic Manager, you open Inventory Items and you add one in. You can create presets of anything in this asset. By default, you'll want to add an optic inventory item. But if you want to add an entire configuration, that's everything including rail position, so probably for a specific weapon, this is the class that you'll want to descend from and then change that. But for now, let's just add the generic one that creates a drop down. We can come in here and give it an optional name. We'll call this default. And we can add an item to the rail. And let's go for the HoloViz Reflex. And as you can see, it's got all of its defaults already configured. And it's looking good, it should run. Let's give it a go. There's our optic. Looking good. Looking pretty simple. Nothing too fancy, but it does the job. Now you can go into the settings and adjust the distance of the ADS camera from the main surface of the lens if you want to get in closer. I call this the Warzone feel, where it's a little bit blurry and it's quite far out, so you've got quite a bit of peripheral vision, because nobody really wants their peripheral blocked in one of these games. But what if we wanted to cant that mount in some way? Well, we can do that, because, let's face it, that's cool. The asset comes with two canted meshes at the moment. One of them sits above the rail, like so, and the other sits to the side of the rail, which is quite good for putting it on the top of our scope mount. As you can see, we've even branded these. So to add it, all we do is we set that. It doesn't need a lens material index, that will be ignored. You can set a display name if you're going to be using a UI and have this configurable, and you can set an inventory icon. Also worth noting, you can add attachments at this point. We won't do it. By default, every mount has a place to add a scope or an optic of some sort, but you can also define additional attachment points, and I'll show you those in a minute, but let's see how that looked. Oh, look at that. So as you can see, we've set up ALS to automatically tilt the gun so that the camera is always up. So there is an ADS camera attached to every optic that you can configure, and its up is Canon when it's being used. And you can also see this neat little plugin that's showing the viewport on the right and automatically follows the camera, courtesy of Jack Noble. You can find that on GitHub, and I'll link to it in the video below. So how do we create these stacked optic clusters that let us add more than one optic to an assembly? Well, let's go through the process. First, let's add our Rocksteady mount again, or our Vorpal blade with a Rocksteady mount. That's already configured and ready to go. And then we come down to the place where we want to attach it. Now, both scopes and mounts can have attachments, so if there is a mounting rail built into a scope, and if you've added an attachment point, you can attach things to it. Likewise for a generic rail. But if, in this case, you have your attachments on your mount, you do it there. So let's come into this, we go down to Mount and Attachments, and then we add our HoloViz Reflex. Let's see how that looks. Whoops. You know what we've done wrong there? We haven't set an attachment point. Let's go fix that. Very important to always set the attachment point. And in this case, the attachment point is 1. There we go. Now we have a working optical cluster. But of course we're still missing our awesome canted sight, so let's add that in. Open up the HoloViz Reflex preset, come down to Mount, come down to Mesh, and let's set canted sight to it. How does that look? Oh yeah, look at that. Really one of the best things about ALS is you get automatic weapon sway and a number of other features, and at least in this project we've added the ability to hold the shift key to steady your breath and stop scope sway briefly. And as you can see, it's actually picking up the scope sway from the ALS breathing animation. We didn't have to make that, it just works. Really quite pleased with that. So there are a couple of other features that we're still working on, but you can get a sneak peek of right now. The first one is the night vision mode. So this asset started out as a thermal optic. Digital scopes are actually quite a bit different from glass scopes in that they have less parallax, less occlusion, and they generally work a lot better. So let's have a look at how you set that up. We've already configured this one here, a wall blade in a spur mount. And if you come to the light mode, you can see we've set it to IR reflectance. That's all you need to do. The rest is automatic. And let's have a look at what that looks like. Let's trash our inventory. Create a new inventory item. Add in our preset. Make sure it's in the right place. Yep. Let's see how it looks. There we go. Now, the way this works is actually kind of ingenious. Unreal doesn't really have alternate buffers or any way to add them, so how do you tell it which parts should glow and which parts shouldn't? Because obviously this is some kind of false color, false shader mode. Well, what we actually do is we use the specular buffer, and we have a global parameter that you can sample in your materials to set whether you're going to show high specular or low specular. So when you are not scoping, your material should display as normal. But when you are scoping, we want it to pretty much become whatever you want to be highly visible. So if you want enemy players to be highly visible, you increase their specularity, which is their IR reflectance, and it will simply just work. Everything else you can leave alone, and you'll at least get a sense of your surroundings, but it won't stand out. That makes it a lot easier to see things that are hidden in the distance, trying to sneak up on you. And as you can see, we have a little bit of detail in these, but in particular these models here have a larger amount of detail, and you can see a number of things that aren't reflecting at all. That's because those materials have not been edited. So how does that work? Alright. If you come into your material, and I've changed it for the master material, we simply have a parameter, a collection parameter named Advanced Optic Global Parameters and one named IR. Now whether you're in thermal or IR mode, this value will be 1.0 if it's enabled and 0 if it's not. So if it's 1, we have a look at our loop and we come from the B channel back here, and what we're doing is we're actually sampling the diffuse buffer. So this is the base color, it leads back into there, and we grab that. We make it negative, we multiply it by 10, and we pass that through anyway. And that's picked up by our custom specular buffer and then used as reflectance. And that's really all you need to do. These three little guys here and these two nodes. And then you will get glowing humans in the dark. So I'm going to use the ALS assets here for a moment to demonstrate how you set up your weapon. ALS comes with some great weapons. We've got the M9 and we've got the M4A1, both configured to work with the advanced optic system. Let's have a look at the M9 first. The M9 is very simple. We've modified this a bit and added 2 new sockets. We have rail start and rail end, and what we've done is we've placed these on the slide so that during animation that optic will move with it. Now, in this case, rail start and rail end are in the same place. This is because this is a more or less fixed attachment point, as there usually isn't a rail on this style of Beretta. It just screws in right there. So that's more or less what we've done. But if you look at the rifle, you can see how it actually works. Here's our rail start. And here's our rail end. And as you can see, we've attached two samples. We've got some backup sights that come with it. And they pretty much sit at 0 and 1 as needed. Another thing we do is when this gun is spawned, we hide the sight bone, which gets rid of that guy. And of course, cleans everything up a lot. So your optics can be attached anywhere along this rail between these two sockets. So all you have to do is line them up with the rail itself. And it doesn't matter too much which way around they are. Later on we might add support for directionality, so it will always face rail end, which can be useful if you're flipping things around or putting a rail on the other side, or rotating a canted mount for instance, but more on that later.